All right, so today I wanted to go over a concept that I've been thinking about and kind of compiling information on for a little while now, maybe the past year or so. And that's the idea of what is the best way to train athletes for increased running speed, specifically athletes who are not track runners. I think that track athletes, there are some implications for for their training that are just significantly different than other athletes based on the fact that their sport is running. But as you know, a lot of the athletes that come in here, one of the primary goals that they have is to run faster. And when we were going through a goal setting session with some of our new athletes, and they come in and say, yeah, I want to run faster, I want to be quicker, I want to do this and that, they may have some preconceived idea about what speed training is for them, and it might not be necessarily the thing that they need to do to run faster. So today I just want to talk about the role of different muscles in sprinting, and a couple concepts and maybe just different ways of thinking about training to improve the function and specifically the strength of those muscles relative to what they're needed to do in sprinting. So in the past, when I've given lectures on speed training, I've taken a sort of kinetic versus kinematic approach. And I think that it's not a bad way to present this information, but it's lacking, now that I think more about it, it's lacking in a few ways. So before I would talk about different ways that we increase force and increase them appropriately relative to sprinting, and how that how athletes need to do this exercise or that exercise to increase the forces they create during running. And a lot of what I'm going to say during this presentation is the same, but before I would kind of break it up between that and then basically their technique with running, which is the kinematic aspect of it. And there's clearly some overlap between those two areas, but in terms of coming up with a presentation and outlining it, before I use that as the outline. Today it's going to be a little bit different, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page with some of the terms, I want to remind you guys about one of the most important principles that is governing our practice, and that's the specific adaptation to imposed demands, or the SAID principle. And that's just that the body specifically adapts to the demands that we impose upon it. So operating inside that paradigm, think about what the demands are for sprinting and what kind of demands we need to impose upon our athlete so that they can specifically adapt to those and get faster. Within that, there exists a lot of specificity in terms of different ways that specificity manifests itself. There are range of motion specificity, movement velocity specificity, muscle action. And so when we think about range of motion, if you spend your time strengthening a muscle in a certain range of motion, then it gets stronger specifically in that range of motion, and the carryover into other ranges is not as great. I'm not going to get super technical and do a lot of referencing during this talk, so just kind of bear with me. And then if you have questions about something specifically, I can talk more about the references or where I got that information. When we talk about movement velocity specificity, this is just the idea that if we want to move fast, some of our training has to be moving fast. And muscle action. So this one's a little more important in terms of what we're going to talk about later, and that's that certain muscles act eccentrically and concentrically during sprinting, and they have different roles in terms of the percentage of eccentric to concentric work that they do, and it's probably prudent to sort of examine how those muscles work and then train specifically for that so that you have the adaptation in the right way. And then finally, a big part of this is going to be force vector specificity. So when we think about the force vectors, it includes both the direction and the magnitude of a force. We know from basic physics, if you think of your physics class in high school, when you're running and your feet are hitting the ground, it's hitting you back with an equal and opposite reaction. And so these reactions are the force vectors that we're going to concern ourselves today with. Kind of moving on from the introduction, I want to discuss the role of different muscles in sprinting. And when I talk about these things, I want you to understand that what I'm speaking about is the primary role of these muscles. If we wanted to break it down and talk about some really finite biomechanics during sprinting, of course we could pick some things apart and find out how these muscles may work in other ways or other actions that they have. But in general, I'm going to talk about how they work and how I think is important to understand the way that they work in relation to training athletes. So, and training these athletes to run faster. When we think about sprinting, and it's something that we've all done and are familiar with the activity, it can be fairly confusing for multiple reasons. One, because you're running fast, or the person you're observing is running fast, and so just the fact that movement velocity is so high, it's tough to discern what exactly is occurring at in all their joints. The other thing is that when we think about the sort of primary joints that are involved, hip, knee, and ankle, there are a lot of muscles that cross all three of those joints in a lot of different angles, and what we see is the sort of aggregate result of all of their muscles working together in a certain way, which is the athlete moving past us quickly. But when we break that down, there are a lot of things going on within that are important to realize. So again, this is a very general and basic analysis of sprinting, but I think it's important to understand as we get into the later parts of the presentation. So in general, I kind of divide things up into a couple basic categories. So first we have our quads and calves. And